For this opportunity to see so many folks here on the Zoom and watching digitally at home. David, I know I speak for David Mann and I when we say it's so wonderful to be out in the community despite the pandemic, coming up with creative and innovative ways to allow us to share our vision, but also to hear what the questions are, what the concerns are, what the challenges are, what the hopes are of our constituents moving forward. I'll tell you a little bit about my personal history, my professional history, and then, of course, my vision to move Cincinnati forward in a bold and innovative way. I'm the son of a refugee. Some of you may know that. My mom was born in Tibet and forced to flee when the communists took over. So my grandparents and my mother made their way through the Himalayas, through Nepal, and into India, where she grew up as a refugee, starting in a small refugee camp in southern India. She got an education. She made it to college in New Delhi, India, where she met my father, who's from Punjab. They got married and they decided to come to the United States. And of all places they could have gone, New York to California, they chose Beaver Creek, Ohio in 1980. I was born a couple years later. So yes, I'm half Tibetan, half Indian. I'm 6'3", but I'm all Ohio, born and raised. So went to Ohio State after attending public schools, then moved to Cincinnati to attend the UC College of Law. I worked at the Legal Aid Domestic Violence Clinic representing women who were victims and survivors of abuse who couldn't afford an attorney. After law school, I worked at a large law firm in Washington, D.C., but I got homesick, returned home, and was a special assistant U.S. attorney, federal prosecutor in our local U.S. attorney's office, working with the now U.S. attorney who was just named this week by President Biden, Ken Parker, who mentored me and continues to mentor me today. Most recently, I was the global brand attorney for Olay and CoverGirl at Procter & Gamble, which made me a beauty attorney, which is ridiculous. But I loved my job at P&G, but decided in 2016 to run for office. I ran for the Hamilton County Clerk of Courts, and people thought I was crazy to run for an office that very few people had heard of or very few people knew what was about. But I ran for it because I believe our courts are special. They're the one place where it shouldn't matter what you look like, where you're from, or how much money you have. It's the one place where the playing field should be absolutely equal. And for generations, unfortunately, that wasn't true in Hamilton County, particularly in the clerk's office. And I respectfully disagree with David Mann. I think the 200 public servants who have been coming into work every single day in the clerk's office, many of whom have risked their lives, many of whom have become very, very sick as a result of contracting COVID. I think those public servants are heroes, and I pay them hero pay because of that. The clerk's office is a critical part of our government, a massive organization that works 24/7, 365 days a year. Very proud of my organization and very proud to be elected the first Democrat in 100 years to be in that position. I'm no stranger to taking a corrupt government organization and turning it around. That's exactly what I did at the clerk's office starting day one. Ended the patronage and nepotism that had prevented so many people who look like me and so many Black people from getting a job in that building for generations. But we did more than that. We treated our employees with dignity, offering comprehensive paid family leave. Folks, we didn't even have maternity leave when I first started. So if you got pregnant, you were forced to use vacation or sick time. We pay a living wage, including a hero bonus during this pandemic, because my employees can't work remotely. They have to come to work every single day to ensure that our system of justice functions. We protected our LGBTQIA employees from discrimination far before the landmark SCOTUS decision. And we've led on justice reform, partnering with the National Bail Project to come into Hamilton County and help us reform our cash bail system, launching a nationally recognized nationally recognized and awarded help center that helps people who can't afford an attorney stay in their homes, deal with wage garnishment, deal with small claims. And folks, after doing all of that, every single year of my administration, I've given money back to the general fund of the county, saving Hamilton County taxpayers millions and millions of dollars. That's what I believe the city needs right now. Bold, effective leadership to push us into the future. Because folks, I don't need to tell you, this has been a really challenging year. Challenging because so many of us have lost. And I know that personally. My wife is a doctor with Bethesda North and Good Sam. She, from the beginning of this pandemic, she has treated COVID patients every single day. A lot of the days she wins that battle, but too many days she loses. We've all lost. Some of us have lost our homes. Some of us our jobs. Some of us have lost loved ones. It's been, an unfortunately historic year, historic because of the pandemic, historic because of the economic downturn, historic because of the increase in violence, and yes, historic because of 4 indictments on council. I know that's not an inspiring start, but I think it's important to understand what the stakes are. And I'm running for mayor because I believe our best days are ahead. I believe that Cincinnati rises exactly when the deck is stacked against us. And I think if you run for mayor, you should have a plan. You should tell the voters what your vision is and what you're going to do. And we have enunciated our plan with our vision with 4 comprehensive plans. The first is a plan for economic recovery, because we are still in the middle of this pandemic. And unless we get vaccination rates up, unless people feel safe congregating and working in person in our economic centers, our economy and therefore our city will continue to be hobbled. So when we come out of this pandemic, we have to come out swinging to grow our city, grow our population, grow our tax base, grow our skyline, so we can get back some of what we've lost. And my plan on my website right now, aftabformayor.com, goes through how we recover, how we grow, and most importantly, how we grow with equity. Here's just a couple of ideas. Number one, right now, it's incredibly hard to open up a small business in our city. You've got to deal with the county, you've got to deal with the city, you've got to deal with the state. There's so much red tape. It's so bureaucratic. I know a thing or two about taking a bureaucratic government organization and making it more accessible for everyday folks. That's what I did in the clerk's office. That's what I want to do in the city. Let's have navigators, small business navigators, to work with entrepreneurs, to walk them through the process for what permits they need to get, what strategies they can employ to do it quickly, and not just giving them a checklist, but someone who will work with you every step of the way to help you understand what the watchouts are so that you can open your business more quickly, so you can employ staff more quickly, generate revenue for the city more quickly, and continue to push us forward. That's just one idea about how we grow our economy. But when we grow, we have to grow with equity, and that means ensuring that the successes of our economy are shared amongst the 52 neighborhoods, not just concentrated on our wealthiest neighborhoods. And in order to do that, we have to make sure that we empower our Black community to increase Black ownership of homes, Black ownership of businesses, and Black ownership of neighborhoods. And the city can be a powerful force in that racial equity piece for our economy. We can continue to prioritize diversity and inclusion for the millions and millions of dollars that we hand out in city contracts. And we can do that by ensuring that we lower the barriers to entry for Black-owned businesses and women-owned businesses, and increase the percentage of city contracts going to those Black-owned businesses. We can also do that by breaking up some of the massive contracts that we put out there so that smaller Black-owned businesses can compete on a more even playing field. And then finally, we can look for opportunities for our incredible Fortune 500 corporations who are here in Cincinnati to partner with some of our Black-owned businesses locally. Here's an example. The Reds, the Bengals, FC Cincinnati, they all licensed their logo to a local female Black-owned business, Originalities. So Originalities can sell their apparel through their store. That's wonderful news for Originalities, but it's also great news for the Reds, the Bengals, and FC Cincinnati. Working together as an economy, lifting all of us up, that's going to be my priority. My second plan is affordable housing. We need a comprehensive affordable housing strategy because unfortunately right now, we just don't have one. I see it every single day in eviction court where in the middle of a pandemic, we are evicting disproportionately Black mothers. We can do better. What we have to do is increase the supply of our housing across the board, increase low income housing, increase affordable housing, increase workforce development housing, and yes, increase market rate housing. And the first thing that we can do is take a look at our zoning code. Our zoning code right now is from a bygone era. It is antiquated. It is creating and envisioning a city from the 50s. And it does that by restricting multifamily units. And it also does that by having parking requirements for businesses and for homes. If we want to increase supply, we've got to get rid of these artificial caps in our zoning code where it makes sense. The second thing we've got to do is reform our tax abatement process. Right now, the city is being sued in federal court because a vast majority of our tax incentives and tax breaks for housing are concentrated in our 3 wealthiest communities. That doesn't make any sense. The current administration believes it doesn't matter where housing goes as long as we have more housing. I agree with half of that. I think we need more housing, but I believe it matters a great deal where it goes. I want to encourage more housing, more new quality housing in Bond Hill and Price Hill, Sedamsville, communities that lack density but are wanting to grow and need the tax incentives in order to do that. So taking a look, reviewing our tax abatement process and making sure, again, that we prioritize equity will certainly be a priority. And then finally, on affordable housing, so much of the conversation focuses on homeowners and forgets the fact that 60% of our city residents are actually renters. And the equities in eviction court are completely unbalanced. Landlords are represented by an attorney 90% of the time. 90% of the time, tenants are representing themselves. They have no idea what's going on. So in order to balance those equities, having a full-time housing court that's countywide, so one judge can hold the bad out-of-town landlords accountable and can work with legacy communities to build them up and help them grow as more economic resources flood into their communities. You know, the third one of my plans is public safety. You know, we heartbreakingly are on track to exceed 400 shootings this year in the city of Cincinnati. I think we need to start thinking more creatively and more innovatively about public safety. But let me say this. We need to state with one clear voice as a community that violent crime has no place in Cincinnati. And if there are bad people hurting good people, we need to hold those bad people accountable. Of course, I do not support defunding the police. I've said that from the very first day of this campaign, and anyone who suggests otherwise is just straight up misleading you. Law enforcement needs the resources to do their job, which is preventing violent crime and holding violent criminals accountable. I think our law enforcement can and should work more with our federal partners at the U.S. Attorney's Office, the ATF, and the FBI to identify who are bringing in these illegal guns and these illegal drugs that have flooded our streets. And let's work collaboratively to hold them accountable. And let's work with our public safety dollars in collaboration with our federal dollars that are coming in and leveraging those federal resources to ensure that we're being effective about violent crime. I want to look for ways to take the burden off of these nonviolent, low-level misdemeanors, take the burden off of the police and allow them to free up the resources to crack down on the violent crime. And one of the ways I suggest doing that, as other cities across the country and the state, in Columbus and Dayton, is to have emergency responders who are unarmed respond to mental health and potentially addiction issues. You know, we just this week we had a presentation to City Hall from a community from Price Hill. Just one neighborhood accounted for 1,200 calls to the police just this year for mental health and addiction issues. One resident in that West Side community called our law enforcement 200 times. So just this year in just one neighborhood, we have spent in excess of $500,000 for police officers responding to these mental health and addiction issues. I don't think the status quo is working. I think we can be more efficient with our resources to free them up to allow law enforcement to do their most important job, which is keeping us safe and making sure that we prevent violent crime. But law enforcement cannot deal with these violent crime issues alone. It's going to take all of us, and it's going to mean continuing to increase the trust between law enforcement and our community. And I think we've got to get back to the fundamentals of the collaborative agreement. You know, fully funding the Citizen Complaint Authority, getting the MAG, the City Managers Advisory Group, back up and running so that we can get back to what made Cincinnati a national model for policing. And then finally, my environmental plan. You know, the environment continues to be not just a top issue here in the city, the state, the country, but the entire world. I mean, we've seen what's going on in the world and in our country with the wildfires and the droughts on the West Coast and the flooding and the hurricanes that are happening on the East Coast. You know, thankfully here in Ohio, while we have seen rising temperatures and while we have seen the deterioration of the Ohio River and, you know, and some flooding, we haven't seen the catastrophic results of climate change yet. It's coming. And Cincinnati needs to continue to be a leader on environmental policies that reduce our emissions, number one. Number two, that conserve our natural resources. And number three, my other big specific goal in the environment, we have a very dirty city, folks. Litter is a problem in Cincinnati, and we need to clean it up. So that's my broad vision for moving Cincinnati forward: economic recovery, public safety, affordable housing, the environment. Folks, the decision that you make in November is so critically important because of the stakes of what I've just laid out. We have some momentum here in Cincinnati, but in order to keep that momentum going, with a new mayor, a new council, a new police chief, a new fire chief, the decision you make will not just have an impact over the next 4 or 8 years, it will have an impact over the next generation. I have put forth a bold, progressive vision to move us forward. And I'm asking you to choose innovation. I'm asking you to choose new ideas. I'm asking you to support our campaign. Thanks so much for the time.
Well, before we open this up to questions from our audience, is David still with us? Councilmember Mann still with us? Or has he left for his meeting? He may have left for his meeting.
He left for the meeting. He waved goodbye, Bill.
Okay. So let's open this up to David Altman. I know you were part of our panel before. Do you have any issue that you want to lay out for us and get a response from Mr. Recorder, Hamilton County Recorder Purevall?
Yeah, I sure do, Bill. Thanks so much. I'm sorry David's gone, but Aftab, you may want to be able to ask some of these questions that I have of David, and I'll also make the last point for you. One, individual accountability. You've got it in the clerk's office because the spotlight's on you, what you do, you can talk about. It's interesting that David did not talk about whether he had ever noticed anything in his years on city council about how the system has eroded to the point where we now have 4 people under indictment. So my point to many of my friends here, Sarah and many others that are on this call, is we do have a way of doing that. And during David's time as vice mayor and subsequently, it eroded. And that is a city manager, a council manager form of government. It is very hard to be corrupt when you have an actual city manager. I was gratified to see that you are for, I think, hiring an actual qualified city manager. That is exactly what did not happen when the mayor picked up the city solicitor to be the city manager. We need an actual city manager, especially in a city with the level of corruption we have. And David, who knows better, should have been leading this the charge for an actual city manager. On the corruption on council, I already said, if you were on city council and you were vice mayor, how come you never noticed anything? Did you ever notice we have developed a strong developer form of government in Cincinnati? A point that I made a couple of weeks ago on here. And I'm glad to hear that the reforms are being talked about, but you might ask David, where he was. Did he notice nothing about the corruption, because I'm as angry about the corruption as he says he is, because we were the best governed city in this country for many decades. Finally, Aftab, I want to be fair and equitable myself, so I'll criticize you.
Great, thanks.
And here it is. We got a bigger problems environmentally in this city than litter. Litter is always a problem. You will never go wrong politically like beating up on litterers. However, you go spend time over in Northside with the people who had their basements flooded by the MSD and ask yourself, what did people like David Mann do to make it equitable? Why did I have to file a lawsuit for two women who've been out of their homes for 2 years, not out of their homes, but living in ruined homes by the flooding caused by the MSD? Why did that have to happen? Look all over this city at the flooding on the MSD, just to take that one issue. There are many others too. We've got bigger problems than litter. And to the environmental community in Cincinnati, when you say my environmental plan includes litter, global warming, of course, you're not going to go wrong by touting that. But my advice to you is look into some of these issues very quickly. Marilyn Wall of the Sierra Club and many others will be happy to talk to you about getting you a little more in tune. And you can beat up on litter too, and you should. But it's just not important to the people that have been failed by the city government and how they've been treated by their metropolitan sewer district, and they're all over this entire city.
David, I appreciate the question to Mann, and obviously I won't answer that one, but I'll address the question you pointed to me. I think you and I are aligned here, actually, David. I didn't say litter was the top issue in our city. I said it was one of the issues, along with reducing our emissions and conserving our natural resources. And if you take a look at my plan, which I encourage you to do, the reason the Ohio Environmental Council, a group that cares very much about Ohio's environment, the reason they endorsed me is because my plan talks about the importance of getting MSD right. My plan talks about the importance of putting together a solid plan in order to get the federal dollars necessary to update MSD. My plan talks about the fact that MSD has been a political football between the city and the county for years, and the only thing that's led to is higher rates for ratepayers, and as you mentioned, even more flooding in folks' basements. I think in order to ensure not just that people pay lower rates, but that we actually protect our Ohio River, we have to get MSD right. And my plan talks about the fact that we've got to get as much as possible mitigate the combined sewer systems, that we have to re-emphasize and reprioritize MSD's modern sewer system as much as possible. But David, in order to do those things, we've got to work collaboratively with the county, and then together the city and the county has to make a strong pitch to the federal government to leverage those dollars to really have the infrastructure that we need to push us forward. And there's some good news here. I mean, the Lick River Greenway on the west side is an incredible recent success, and I think that's the way forward. I'd like to see a greenway across our community that's not just great for our environment and for our infrastructure. It's incredible for community building, for public transportation, because it's an opportunity to create more green new jobs. So the environment is one of my 4 pillars because it touches on growth, it touches on economic equality, it touches on racial equity, because David, as you know, so many of our communities that are poor and Black suffer from less clean water and less clean air. So it really touches on all the things that I care about. Good.
And can we get your pledge that you will go out and look for?
We got to open this up to some other people, David. Peter Hames has an itching question that he even phoned in. Peter, you're still there. You want to ask, David Mann is gone, but you can ask Aftab your question.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
Good afternoon, Aftab. After 8 years of hard and persistent work, we finally got the City Council to adopt an ordinance on community engagement that calls for the city to develop a new program based upon the principles contained in that ordinance. I haven't heard you or David speak about how important community engagement is on issues like crime, on issues like litter pickup. I think all of the issues that you address have some element of important community engagement involved there. So my question is, given this new ordinance that's just been passed, what would you as mayor specifically change to strengthen the city's community engagement program?
Well, right now, thank you, Peter. I supported the ordinance because right now our management in the city has deprioritized community engagement on a whole host of issues. Part of the reason is because of the pandemic, but I don't view that as a reasonable excuse. I mean, right now we are engaging in community dialogue over Zoom, and so there's opportunities to improve that. Peter, you may not have heard me say it, but rest assured, I'm constantly engaging with the community. The very fact that I have 4 comprehensive plans to tackle the big pillars of moving Cincinnati forward is based on dozens and dozens of face-to-face, one-on-one conversations with stakeholders, with local experts on a whole host of issues. And all of those conversations resulted in the plan. I mean, in this campaign alone, Peter, don't just look at what I'm talking about, look at my actions. In this campaign alone, I've done 5 town halls talking about various issues in the community. And so nothing that happens in City Hall, whether it's economic development, whether it's criminal justice and public safety issues, whether it's the environment, nothing in it cannot happen without the support and the engagement from the community. So it's been a priority of mine as I've been the clerk of courts. It's been a priority of mine as I've been a candidate for mayor. And if I'm lucky enough to be elected mayor, it'll continue to be a priority.
Joel, I know that you've had some concerns about city council listening to you and neighborhoods in terms of development projects that are often not good for the actual residents there. Do you want to ask a question to Aftab about that?
Yeah, so thanks so much, Bill, and thank you, Aftab and David, for you all's thoughts and for taking up space at this forum. I guess to the recently released census information, even though the population of Cincinnati has grown, the Black population actually within the city has declined. And a lot of our work that we've been doing at Peasley Neighborhood Center and in the community at large has been focusing on the use of public incentives being used for private development projects and how those could be tied to equity. So Aftab, if you could talk to that, or your positioning, I guess, on tying development public incentives to equity gains, specifically housing or prevailing wage jobs, that would be awesome. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. I think in order for racial equity and racial justice to be a priority for the city, it has to be a priority when we talk about economic growth and development, and when we talk about housing. I spoke a little bit about this before, but racial equity is just not part of the calculus when determining tax abatements and tax incentives on the residential side. And I think it's more than 95% of tax abatements right now for residents are concentrated in Oakley, Hyde Park, and Mount Lookout, 3 of our most wealthy communities. And so I think that's a problem. I think it's a problem when the city is incentivizing wealthy communities to continue to build. What the city should be about is certainly increasing supply of housing, because the more housing that we have across the board, the lower our rents will be and the more affordable our houses will be. But in order to do that, I think it makes sense to incentivize housing ownership and incentivize growth in communities that are looking for density. And so right now, tax abatements are tied almost exclusively to LEED certification. And I'm glad we talked about the environment first because it's so critically important. And LEED certification is of course important too, because it leads to more environmentally efficient houses. And it also leads to good quality homes being built with good quality materials. But what it has done is, because location isn't part of that decision matrix and it's almost exclusively based on LEED certification, we're building really quality, really great homes in communities that are already dense for communities who don't necessarily need those tax breaks. And so I believe a straightforward solution in keeping LEED certification part of the decision matrix, but adding location as well, so that if you're building in communities that lack the density, that lack the economic resources, you get even more of a tax break, so that we can incentivize growth in communities like Bond Hill and Price Hill that are looking to grow.
Other questions out there? Carolyn Miller, you've been doing a lot of work on the reform issue. Is there any issue you want to ask about that? The issue that came up 2 weeks ago with our citizen panel talking about issues that they want city council and the mayor to look at. One of them, David Altman brought up to a degree, was strengthening the city manager system. The mayor, obviously the mayor has grown in authority, but we still have basically a council manager system. How do you propose balancing that, Aftab?
Well, Bill, I think we have to be true to our charter. I mean, I think we've seen what happens when politicians ignore the Constitution and ignore laws and rules. And I'm not talking about just DC, although we've seen it there. I'm talking about Cincinnati. We've got a charter that spells out our form of government, that makes it clear what the city manager's job is, makes it clear what city council's role is, and makes it clear what the mayor's role is. I don't think it makes sense for us to constantly change our charter. We have a strong charter. I think we just have to respect the charter. That, with all of these charter amendments that happen every single year, we are tinkering and fooling around constantly, and it makes it hard to have consistent government and frankly a consistent rule of law. So I'm not in favor of continuing to tinker with the charter. I think we've got to get back to the fundamentals of the charter, which made it strong, which is separation of powers. And I believe we need to elect folks who are going to respect that. And I do. I mean, it's my job as mayor to set a bold vision to move us forward. And I believe I've done that with my plans. And then it's up to, city council to determine the budget and the city funding. And it's up to the city manager to execute on that vision and based on that budget. It's not my job, for example, to negotiate the specifics of development deals. I think we've seen city council folks do that, and that's just opportunities for corruption left and right. We've got to empower the professionals in that building to negotiate those deals. And when we disagree with the professionals, which I'm sure we will, those disagreements should be public, transparent. If I'm lucky enough to be elected, I'll put an end to the backroom deals.
Hey, Bill.
Yes.
If I may, I would like to follow up on that. And this is a fact here that we have two candidates, both from the Democratic Party. You speak of separation of powers and checks and balances, which is in our federal constitution all the way down to our local government. There is no viable Republican candidate to balance the politics. We have two Democrats running for mayor. City council is predominantly Democratic. David Mann, he tries to pull in the Republican vote for himself, but he's really a Democrat. So really, what do you plan? What can we do to impose more checks and balances if the mayor appoints the city solicitor and the police chief and we can be smug about it, but strong government has its points, but also it's up to corruption. You think of our old days, the Boss Cox times, strong, powerful government getting things done, but also corruption. Checks and balances, so important.
Yeah, I'm not sure I quite follow the question. I am a Democrat. David Mann is a Democrat. This race is a nonpartisan race. And so the reason why there are two Democrats vying for mayor is because we had a primary in May. And irrespective of party doesn't appear on the ballot, irrespective of party, the top two vote finishers in May move on to the general election. So Charleston, if you want more diversity in political ideology, you should support, someone to run.
Right. Of course.
Other questions or, of course, Councilmember Mann isn't around. Do you have some final remarks for us, Aftab, before we close this down?
I didn't realize I'd have so much time. I'm grateful for all the questions. Thank you, guys.
And any other questions out there before we let Aftab make a final remarks?
Yes,
Yes, yeah.
I just want your possible thoughts on how we might resolve the issue, since our tax base is seems to be continuing to dwindle because of people staying at home now and now not wanting to pay the Cincinnati taxes. What do you have in mind there?
Steve, this is the issue that keeps me up at night. I'll be quite honest. Listen, let me say first, I do not think it makes sense to raise taxes, including the earnings tax, in the middle of a pandemic. I do not want to raise taxes. But the fact of the matter remains, Steve, and you put your finger on it, no one can tell us what the economic impact to our budget will be from folks getting a refund from their earnings tax. Let me set the stage for you. Something like 2/3 of our basic services from our general fund are funded from our earnings tax, 2/3. And so if you live outside the city and your job is inside the city, but because of the pandemic, you're working from home, you can get a tax refund for all of those days and therefore don't have to pay the earnings tax. No one can quite tell us what that's going to do to our budget and how much of an impact will that be on our revenue and therefore our basic services. So look, Steve, obviously we need to be as efficient as we possibly can as a city and conserve our resources as much as possible. I don't think it makes sense to raise taxes, but it puts even more pressure on us as a city to grow. To grow our tax base, to grow our population, to grow. And that will be on me to get that done. Now, the other side of the coin from these remote workers staying at home outside the city is we can be a destination for remote work to come to Cincinnati. I mean, Steve, if you can work and live anywhere, I want you to come to Cincinnati. We don't know it yet, but we are in the fight for our lives for remote workers. Come to Cincinnati, where we have a relatively, in the national context, affordable city, the best public high school in the state, incredible research institutions like the third best children's hospital in the world and the University of Cincinnati Health Center. We've got incredible Fortune 500 companies here. We are a growing city. We need to be marketing ourselves and coming up with creative incentives to get those people here. But fundamentally, in order to be a destination for young, diverse families who are frankly my age and look like me, we need to be prioritizing creating neighborhoods that are dense, that are diverse, that lean into the arts, that are walkable, that have good public transportation. That, at the end of the day, will be the biggest selling point for Cincinnati, and that's what I hope to do.